computer. All right, we're really excited today. We've got a special guest that's going to talk to us about for here on the island, a kind of growing field of the lending industry. I've got the one and only Damon Steele of Pilot Mortgage Group. Damon, I want to thank you for taking some time to speak with us and our audience today.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, let's get right into it. I'll get you to introduce yourself, years in the business, a little about your team, and maybe just a little bit about your experience in the industry.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So I've been a mortgage broker for 14 years. My focus now is on business development, which is mostly finding ways in which we can help our clients get over the finish line. So working with new changes in market, it's harder to qualify for mortgages now with higher interest rates, with higher purchasing prices. So how can we get creative to get people into the homes that they want without having to forego some of the, things that are most important in their like wants and needs list.
Nice. Well, it's definitely a more challenging market for everybody now. The almost free money is over. Although, hey, not bad news yesterday with them at least holding the Bank of Canada holding the rate. So it seems like there's a little glimmer of hope into the future. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it was pretty much expected across the board that we'd be holding rates, with even some people being optimistic that there might be a rate cut. But the BOC has not signaled that they have even considered or thought about rate cuts yet, and that was still their tone following that meeting. What we have seen, though, is we've probably seen anywhere between 20 and 30 basis point rate reductions in fixed term rates. So the market's reaction to all of this is, they're anticipating cuts to happen as early as the summer of this coming year in variable rates, but we're already starting to see reductions towards fixed rates. So you're seeing fixed rates now coming below a 6 handle. So we're in that or in that high 5% range, which is a nice number to see after probably 7 or 8 months of everything remaining in the above 6% zone.
Great. Okay. Well, that's in line with my rough forecast as to what people might be able to expect going into 2024. But we talked a few years back, Damon, and what I really loved about our talk is you really have honed in on a pretty particular part of the industry here, and that is, and I point to an article that came out last year from CBC, and it was, I'm just reading it here, but it was the average parental contribution for a home purchase, for a first-time home purchaser in Vancouver. And the average parental contribution was $180,000, which blew my mind. I mean, this is like a life-changing amount of money. And, over here on the island, it's, I might see a parent co-sign. I've seen a parent kick in $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 to help get someone over the finish line. But $180,000, I mean, I don't want to age myself, but that was a little less than what I paid for my entire first home when I moved here to Nanaimo in 2007. So I talk about from 2008 to 2015, our average house price was $350,000. So $180,000 contribution would have paid for over half the house. Now, fast forward to 2023, the average house price here in Nanaimo is sitting around $800,000. So we're starting to see a little more of this, frankly, a lot more of this. And this is something that you really do. Tell me about your experience in this field and how much of this you've seen over your career.
Yeah. So, when I first started in mortgage brokering, it wasn't uncommon that parents would be helping out in some fashion. And, we might have a conversation with our clients about what they're pre-qualified for. And then we'd say, now that you know what you can get in terms of a mortgage, time to reach out to mom and dad and see if they can contribute in some meaningful way. And meaningful way, 13, 14 years ago was like, $10,000, $20,000, which was actually sufficient to try and move the needle and help people get into the property that they want. Now, probably in the last 3 years or so, what we found is that given the higher price of property, given factors like you can't do less than 20% down if you're buying a property that's over $1 million. And I'm on the mainland here, so that's a pretty common occurrence for even entry-level homes. it's a much more substantial sum of money you need to put down, which is just entirely impossible to save up for, even when you're a high earning professional in your early 30s, who've just finally getting through their student debt. So the conversation is no longer, reach out to your parents and see what they can do to help. It's, we should have a conversation with your parents and come up with a plan. And
Yeah.
that's where we've really moved our focus, is to collaborating with parents and helping them with the decision making on how they can support their kids in being able to buy the home that fits their needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can only imagine sitting my father down to discuss $180,000 contribution to my home purchase and what might start racing through his mind. And so, with that in mind, tell me, I guess two things. What are the major concerns expressed by parents? Because there's probably some misconceptions as to how, I think fears of losing their own home where they contribute. And then maybe once you've addressed the concerns that are front and center, what are the real concerns, and how do you guys work with to mitigate those concerns?
Yeah, well, I'll first start off by saying a lot of the time when we speak with our clients and we propose the idea of having their parents involved, often they, either they don't want to do that, they don't want to have that conversation, they don't want to be put into an uncomfortable spot to have that conversation. And one of the things that we found is that parents are often, and again, this is all relationship dependent, but parents are often kind of surprised that they weren't asked when it comes to when their kids are purchasing. So for instance, again, like in the mainland, maybe these kids have grown up in the North Shore and they have a budget now that can, be suitable in the Fraser Valley, right? So they're going into Abbotsford, they're going into Chilliwack, and their parents had wished they had been asked earlier about providing some support so that they could have been closer to home, so that they could have had
Right.
their grandkids closer to home. So I just want to add to this before we kind of jump into like what parents are often protesting or kind of what their objections usually are. It's that they do want to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Parents do want to help, but if you are going to have that conversation with your parents, you have to be prepared for what they might come up with or what they might have some issues with. So they want to help. They would love to help in a meaningful way, but they need to be able to have clarity on what that might mean. And the first place that you have to start is, how much money are we talking about? Right? Because if you do go to have a conversation, you like you said, talking to your dad, and you say, "I need 180,000," he'd probably think he misheard you, right? So you need to
Yes.
be able to have that conversation, or have somebody assist you with having that conversation about what would be a meaningful amount to support whatever that home buying need might be, and how are the ways in which it could be structured so that it works best for them. So if it's something that they can provide as just cash, right? Family gift, the bank of mom and dad, sometimes we call it. If that can be provided, maybe it's something that we may have to have a conversation with their accountant and even their financial advisor. So you really want to have a good stakeholder going to bat for you to make sure that that conversation is happening. If their financial advisor has any concerns or worries or anything like that, we can also be involved to that conversation as well, to just basically prepare them like, this is how they can assist it. Here's the timing of it when we would need the money. Um, if, let's say, for instance, we need to pull it out of home equity, which is coming up more and more frequently. So where parents basically, I don't have $180,000 to give you, but I do have a house that's owned free and clear. It's continued to grow and grow in value over the years. How can we maybe tap into that as more of an early inheritance to be able to support their kids? And I'm a pensioner. I don't have the income to support a high mortgage payment, by tapping into that equity. Or you've got siblings. How do I make this fair across the board for everybody? So there's
Mm-hmm.
options that exist. There's mortgage products that exist where there's no payments, right? So if we know that those parents aren't planning to live there for more than 5 years or 10 years, maybe we structure something that's going to give them 10 years of no payments. Property value continues to appreciate. There's interest costs that accumulates, but then it all gets paid out when they decide to sell and downsize in the future. right? So good way to kind of work around some of those problems. If it's say an issue with making it fair across the board for siblings, well,
Yeah.
maybe we can work with an estate lawyer that can help with making this a shared early inheritance for all. So if, let's say, for instance, the parents are contributing to this down payment, maybe that comes out of the final sum in the inheritance later on that gets distributed amongst the other siblings. So lots of ways to equalize things to be able to make this all work. But I would say those would be two big objections. The third one is often parents are concerned with what their risk is.
Yeah.
If, let's say, they were to co-sign. So this is a different matter. Let's say not just with regards to the down payment component, right? That's like just the money you're giving them. Another option that parents may have to help their kids out when it comes to buying is possibly co-signing. So that's where they
Mm.
go on the mortgage as well. And so the concern that they may have in doing something like that is more like, well, what happens to my home if my kids stop making the mortgage payment?
Yeah, we hear this a lot.
A lot. And so this is one where um, they're concerned with, if the kids stop making mortgage payments, I have no recourse, I can't do anything, I can't force them to pay. Is the bank going to take my home? And that's not the case. So that's the first thing that I want to clear the air on. The bank uses the kid's home as the collateral. You're on there to help with supporting payments. So they're going to ask you to make the payments if your kids aren't making the payments. And if they're not making the payments, you can force the sale of the property. So you can
Right.
engage for that sale to occur on that property, but it's not as though that the bank is going to have recourse to be able to take your home. They're going to be taking the kids' home.
Right. So in the unlikely scenario, there might impact their credit, maybe their access to additional credit, but in no case are they going to have a situation occur where payments aren't being made, and now the bank's coming to take their house too, which I think is probably the biggest fear that they have, and one that's just not really embedded in reality, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And a part of the co-signing idea, or like having them being on the mortgage, is not to have it be permanent. This is
Right.
really to get over the finish line. What I would often recommend when we do the planning around this is also starting to put together kind of like, what are the milestones that we need to achieve so that we can remove the parents as co-signers in the future. That could be property value increases by another 2 to 3%, which might be reasonable and attainable in the next couple of years, right? Or in a year, or whatever that may be. Maybe it's on the basis that their kids are earning a little bit more income. And what does that mean, right? Maybe it's based on how much debt they're able to pay off, or, let's say the kids are anticipating to be able to make a large lump sum towards the mortgage at some date in the future. Those would all be milestones that we can actually set so that we can factor into our decision making. In 3 years, we intend to remove you from this loan.
Great, great. So that's all happening as part of this before we're even making the commitment to the mortgage. We're going through our due diligence period, and we're getting all these questions answered so the parents can know exactly when they, maybe they have dreams to buy a rec property in 6 years. And so they can get the co-sign off in the next 4 and still go out. Their dreams are not hitting pause on an indefinite timeline. You can start to identify those benchmarks. I imagine
Yeah,
that's super helpful.
absolutely. One thing that we actually come across when we start kind of going through this engagement is that the parents want to help. They don't necessarily want to make it a handoff or a handout, sorry. So they also want to create some fairness among siblings. So as opposed to it just being, here's a gift of money and for you to do what you want with, sometimes they're actually exploring the options of co-investing. So this is one where um, not necessarily where the parents have to live in the home, so they could
Hmm.
actually continue to live where they want to be, but they're just contributing to the investment in the property. They have an ownership stake in the property, which the kids have the first right to be able to buy them out at some point in the future so that they could
Okay.
remove them, but could form a way that if, let's say, for instance, the parents were to pass away before, let's say, that does get paid out, it would form part of their estate. It becomes fair across the board for all the siblings.
Right.
It could be something that grows in value and that the kids later on may refinance to pay them out for that increased value. So they've made an investment into that property. And, while, let's say, for instance, it is an investment and they're getting a return on that investment, the kids are so thankful that they were able to have the opportunity to be able to purchase the property. And so it was certainly worth it for them. It's like seed capital, let's call it, in your kids.
Yeah. And a pretty good investment over the last decade. Had anyone taken them up on that, might even outperform the equity markets.
Yep.
Interesting. So is that similar structure? So one of the trends I've seen here more than the $180,000 parental contributions is families very often selling from the mainland. They're selling their White Rock property and moving over here with the kids, and then they're looking at buying, either an acreage that has two houses on it, or a really nice home that has a really nice suite, and sort of living in the same space together as a way to both downsize for the parents, and then empower their kids to raise their grandkids in a home like what they were used to growing up. So is this the similar structure on how you structure those, or are there some differences there?
It's pretty similar to how we would structure those. What we'd probably add into the mix, and this isn't necessarily, well, it can be attached to the mortgage, but we would probably ask that they would have a joint venture agreement if they're all going to be cohabitating. So
Okay.
if you're all going to be living together, you sell your, small condo and they sell their, small house in Vancouver here, and they buy that compound
Yeah.
acreage on the island.
Yep.
It would be about, if they are going to be all kind of living together, who's responsible for what, right? Because there's probably going to be a mortgage that's associated with it. That the parents contribute so much money that there's no requirement for them to contribute to the mortgage, or maybe they contribute to a small percentage of the mortgage. Can we structure the mortgage in such a way where there's different tiers of lending, that one is related to one party and one is related to the other, and each one knows who's responsible for what, as well as like what's going to be the living situation there as well. So like that's one of those things where we would want to have that conversation well in advance before anything happens, before they start selling properties, before they start buying anything, to make sure that everyone is crystal clear on what the responsibilities are of each party. And so they're all buying together. They're typically all associated with mortgage, but they may have different levels of association, like different expectations in terms of, well, who's paying what and who can pay
Yeah.
off theirs first, as well as who's taking out the garbage, who's mowing the lawn, who's taking care of the household. Are we paying for a cleaner?
That's great. So you're encouraging getting all those details out of the way before we hit the commit button on this. That seems really intelligent. Now, had some great advice early in a career. Any good partnership starts with the planning of the exit plan. And so what happens if one party wants to no longer be part of the compound? How do you address that up front?
Yeah, so that's included in that joint venture agreement. So it
Got it.
stipulates everything from someone passes away. And so what insurances are put in place to pay out the mortgage? Because like, hey, that's another person that's not making those mortgage payments, right? So let's say, the primary income earner who was contributing the majority to the mortgage, well, if that person's no longer around, well, who's paying for that? Right. So there should be things like provisions for insurances to protect every stakeholder in this.
Right.
What happens if someone separates? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, one person separates, what's the responsibilities of all parties? Who, if let's say they want to sell an equity stake in it, like who, like how can you create fairness? Like maybe you don't want somebody else to buy that property. So having clarity in a partnership agreement, having it drafted with someone who's familiar with having these types of living situations set up so that they can address all of the potential um, considerations that could come up, and being able to have an assessment. And it's not necessarily the most like, you know, positive thing to talk about, what happens if someone passes away or anything like that, but it's absolutely necessary so that
Yeah.
you can actually feel confident going forward with this. And you can actually sometimes unearth like, oh, you know what, this was never going to be a good idea,
Yeah.
right? So before you get in to something as, significant as this, living all together, co-owning a property together, where you're also responsible for these things, you're going to want to make sure that you have those frank discussions with everybody involved
So
to make
important.
sure you're 100% on the same page.
Yeah, that was the advice I got. If you can, in a business partnership or whatever partnership, if you can get through the nuanced discussion of the exit plan and still want to move forward with it, then you've got the basis of a great partnership. But to have that conversation ahead of the commitment, as opposed to at the end of it, when maybe the rose colored glasses aren't so rosy anymore, a lot
Mm.
easier when if everyone's entering into it, well, if I want to get out of this, I know exactly how that's going to go. So that makes so much sense. Damon, I love that you've spent so much time perfecting this part of mortgages, and that you've created the team with the bringing in the investment advisors, bringing in the lawyers with the experience. So I think, for anyone watching this, if they are considering this type of agreement, I think Damon and his team would be the perfect place to start. Now, before we get into how people reach you, I always like to just include a little bit of quick fire just to learn a little bit about you. I know you and I have had a lot of coffees, and I've got to know you on a personal level, but I just want to, connect on that area. So I've got a few little questions, just kind of first thing that comes to mind on these, and then I'll get your contact information before we end the call. So in your free time, Damon, where are we most likely to find you?
Probably playing with my daughter in the park near our house.
Nice. How old's your daughter?
2.5.
Oh, beautiful. What's her name?
Yeah.
You want to
April.
share? April. Oh, I love that name. My youngest daughter's name's June, so love the month name. So
Yeah.
all right. Do you are you a sports guy? What's your favorite sport to watch?
Favorite sport to watch is baseball.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I remember watching baseball with my grandpa. It's a good one. Do you play a sport? What's your favorite sport to play?
Favorite sport to play is squash. Yeah.
Squash. Okay.
Still love playing squash.
I keep getting asked, there's a squash court near where I live, and I'm told it's a pretty good workout. So maybe you'll have to take me out on the course and make me look bad one day. What's your favorite genre of music?
Metal.
Metal. Okay, yeah. Nice. So what's a metal band that you love, or a couple?
Well, you can't go wrong with, Metallica was what brought you into the fold, and there's a million other subsets of the genre from there, but gotta stay tried and true with the originals.
I love that. I wouldn't have guessed it, but that's why I asked. Last band you saw live?
Wow. You know what? I haven't seen a band since before COVID, but oh man, let me think about this one.
Come on, you're in the scene there. You got so many great shows in Vancouver.
I know. And it wasn't a metal band. It was probably something I went to with my wife. I don't know if I want to share. I think it may have been Bruno Mars.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that was a good time. He's a good entertainer.
Yeah.
Awesome. Last one, because I get to visit Vancouver all the time. It's only a 17-minute seaplane ride away. What's your favorite Vancouver restaurant? If you're heading out for just you get to pick where you're going. Where are you going?
Great Italian spot called Tavola.
Tavola.
Yeah.
Where's that one located?
Robson and Denman. Just a little bit past Denman. So it's kind of like outside of where all of the other restaurants are along Robson. You just go a little bit past Denman, and it's this little place, just kind of hidden away. Amazing Italian food, and service is phenomenal. And it's been around for years and years and years.
I'm taking my two daughters over to Vancouver for our annual Christmas weekend. We're at the Hotel Vancouver for 2 nights. I'm going to put Tavola on the hit list based on your recommendation.
Yeah.
All right, Damon, that's appreciate your time. Tell us, just end the call here. If someone wants to get in touch with you or your team, how do we go about doing that?
Best way to get a hold of me is over my mobile phone. And so it's 604-607-4704. Call me, text me. Easiest way to get a hold of me anytime.
All right, and we'll include the link to your Pilot Mortgage Group website in the post. And appreciate your time, Damon. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over the years, and I think this was a really valuable conversation. I hope our audience got something out of it. And
Likewise.
I thank you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right, my pleasure.